Her smile lingered just a second too long, and I couldn't look away. I had lived in the apartment building for almost a year, and yet I hadn't noticed her until that morning. She appeared at the top of the stairs, sunlight catching in her hair, and for a moment the world felt quieter, smaller, as if everything else had been pushed to the background. Her smile met mine, warm, casual, but it lingered just a fraction too long. I froze, caught off guard by the intensity of something so ordinary, so fleeting. If you like my story, then subscribe my channel. Her presence seemed to fill the hallway. I noticed the subtle sway of her shoulders as she carried a small bag, the faint, comforting scent of her perfume drifting like a whisper. There was an ease in her posture that suggested confidence, but her eyes held a kind of quiet curiosity, a softness I hadn't expected. I realized I was staring, perhaps longer than I should, and quickly looked away, my pulse betraying my attempt at composure. Later that day, I kept thinking about the smile, how it lingered, almost teasing, as if she knew the effect it had. It wasn't a smile meant to seduce, at least not in any deliberate way, but it left me unsettled, aware of a flutter in my chest I wasn't used to. I found myself replaying the moment, noticing the small details. The way the sunlight kissed her cheek, the hint of laughter in her expression, the casual tilt of her head. I kept my mornings predictable, my routine safe, but now every step toward the stairs felt different. Each creak of the floorboards seemed louder, each sound in the hallway sharper, because I half expected to see her again. I wondered if she would notice me noticing her, if she would catch me glancing when she thought I wasn't paying attention. The thought made me uneasy and thrilled all at once. There was a strange kind of vulnerability in that fleeting smile, too, a quiet honesty that invited curiosity but didn't demand anything. I found myself hoping for another glance, a chance to see her eyes meet mine again, just to confirm she was real, just to feel that small, electric jolt of connection once more. I realized I didn't even know her name, and yet the memory of her presence stayed with me, lingering in ways I didn't expect. Even as I went about my day, the image of her lingered, the soft light around her, the gentle curve of her smile, and the subtle, inexplicable pull I felt toward her. It was a small moment, almost inconsequential in the grand scheme of life, yet somehow it mattered more than anything else I had experienced recently. And in that quiet realization, I understood the start of something that would slowly, carefully, change everything about my mornings, my heart, and the way I noticed the world around me. After that first lingering smile, the apartment building didn't feel quite the same. It was as if every hallway, every stairwell held the potential for another unexpected encounter. I began to notice her presence almost instinctively, her soft footsteps on the carpeted stairs, the gentle click of her heels, even the faint rustle of the bag she carried. Each accidental brush of hands or shared glance sent a small jolt through me, both startling and comforting. I saw her again one morning at the mailbox, reaching for letters at the same time as I did. Our hands brushed lightly, a fleeting touch that lingered just enough to make my heart race. She looked up at me with a quiet smile, one that felt more deliberate than before, though still casual. "Morning," she said, her voice warm but soft, carrying a calmness that contrasted with the sudden nervousness I felt in my chest. We fell into an easy rhythm of small talk, exchanging pleasantries about the weather or the lingering chill of autumn. Each conversation was brief, but there was a growing comfort in the familiarity of her voice, in the way her laughter felt like a gentle exhale. She had this subtle ability to draw attention without demanding it. A glance or tilt of her head felt like an invitation to notice her more closely, to pay attention to the small details I'd missed before. I began to catch myself thinking about her at odd moments, how the sunlight highlighted the soft curve of her cheek, the graceful way she adjusted her scarf, the way her fingers lingered just a second too long on the envelope she was holding. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible magnetism that tugged at my awareness, making my pulse stutter in the simplest of interactions. One afternoon, I offered to help carry a heavy package to her apartment. She hesitated for just a moment, a shadow of surprise crossing her face, before nodding. As I followed her up the stairs, our shoulders brushed, and she leaned in slightly as if to steady herself. The warmth of her presence was immediate and palpable. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume again, a subtle mix of floral and something comforting, lingering in the stairwell even after she stepped inside her door. Our hands barely touched, yet the brief connection sent a ripple of awareness through me. We exchanged polite smiles as I handed her the package. Her eyes met mine, and in that moment, a quiet understanding passed between us. It wasn't spoken, but it was there, an acknowledgement of the unusual comfort we found in these small, coincidental meetings. I left her apartment feeling a mixture of exhilaration and confusion, my thoughts replaying each second of contact with almost obsessive detail. From that day on, the accidental meetings became less accidental, though never forced. Every brief encounter carried the potential for more, a smile that lingered, a shared laugh, a subtle brush of hands, and I found myself looking forward to them in ways I hadn't anticipated. What began as curiosity was slowly unfurling into something more profound, a delicate tension that neither of us needed to name, yet both of us felt in the quiet rhythm of our growing familiarity. Over the next few weeks, our accidental encounters began to feel deliberate, though either of us spoke of it. It was in the small, quiet moments that our connection deepened, moments that could easily be overlooked if you weren't paying attention. One afternoon, I noticed her struggling with grocery bags in the hallway, and without thinking, I offered to help. Her surprise was soft, almost imperceptible, but the flicker of gratitude in her eyes held a depth that lingered long after the bags were carried. As we walked together down the hall, our hands brushed lightly against each other. The touch was fleeting, yet it left an echo of warmth in my chest, a hum of awareness I couldn't ignore. I noticed how her shoulder leaned slightly toward mine, a subtle cue of trust, and the rhythm of her steps felt strangely synchronized with mine, as if the world had nudged us into a quiet alignment. Her laugh broke through my internal tension, a melodic, effortless sound that made even the dull hallway feel brighter. We paused near her door, her hand resting on the doorknob. I hesitated, suddenly aware of how close we were, the faint warmth radiating from her, as if the air itself carried her presence. "Thanks," she said softly, her gaze meeting mine for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. That brief connection left a resonance I carried with me the rest of the day. Later, I found myself looking forward to these small shared moments, a coffee in the lobby, a conversation about the weather, or the way our paths inevitably crossed in the stairwell. Each encounter revealed subtle details about her, how she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when thinking, the quiet intensity in her eyes when she listened, the softness in her voice when she laughed. It was a slow unfolding, a delicate layering of presence and awareness that made even mundane interactions feel charged with meaning. One evening, she invited me to help water the small plants she kept outside her balcony. I leaned over the railing beside her, feeling the warmth of her shoulder near mine. The scent of her perfume mingled with the earthy fragrance of the soil, creating a strange, intoxicating comfort. We worked in companionable silence for a while, occasionally glancing at each other with soft smiles that said more than words could. I noticed the gentle steadiness of her breathing, the way her fingers lingered over the soil as if savoring the small act of care. There was a quiet intimacy in that shared task, an unspoken acknowledgement that our connection was growing deeper. The moments weren't romantic in the conventional sense, but they were intimate, tender, respectful, and charged with the subtle thrill of attention and awareness. As I left that evening, the memory of her presence stayed with me, vivid in a way that surprised me. The shared laughter, the brush of hands, the soft weight of her shoulder against mine, it all lingered, leaving me both unsettled and exhilarated. It was clear that what had begun as curiosity was evolving into something more profound, a slow, patient bond that neither of us fully understood, yet both of us felt in the quiet spaces between words and gestures. As our casual encounters became more frequent, I found myself caught in a quiet turmoil. I wanted to see her, to share in those small, almost sacred moments, but a hesitancy lingered at the edges of my mind. The age difference weighed on me, not as a judgment, but as an awareness of how the world might perceive us, how delicate and unusual our connection seemed. Yet, when she smiled at me, all caution melted away, leaving only the fluttering of my chest and a sense of anticipation I couldn't quite name. One afternoon, I found her sitting on the small bench near the courtyard, sipping coffee and reading a book. The sunlight painted her hair with a warm glow, and I stopped for a moment, mesmerized by the calm presence she radiated. As I approached, she looked up and offered that soft, knowing smile that had haunted my thoughts for weeks. Her eyes held a quiet invitation, and for a brief second, I questioned why I hesitated at all. We talked for a while, lightly at first, about trivial things: the weather, a stray cat that had wandered into the courtyard, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee from the nearby café. Yet beneath the casual conversation, there was a current of unspoken emotion. I noticed the subtle gestures, how her fingers lingered around her mug, how her eyes occasionally searched mine, as if seeking something she wasn't ready to name. Then came the small, intimate moments that left my mind racing. When she shifted slightly on the bench, our shoulders brushed, and I felt a warmth radiate through me, an electric hum that made it impossible to focus on words alone. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned slightly closer, not in a deliberate way, but as though proximity was natural, unforced. I wanted to reach out, to close the gap just a little more, but hesitation rooted me in place. There were times when I caught myself overthinking our interactions. Was she aware of the effect she had on me? Was I reading too much into small gestures? Yet the truth was undeniable. The connection between us had grown beyond casual neighborly politeness. I noticed her vulnerability, the quiet softness behind her confident exterior, and it drew me in further. Each glance, each fleeting touch, carried weight. As the afternoon waned, we lingered in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty but full of possibilities. My mind swirled with conflicting thoughts, but my body and heart betrayed me, leaning toward her without restraint. There was a hesitation, an awareness of boundaries, of propriety, but it was tempered by an undeniable desire to be closer, to understand the subtle layers of her presence. When I finally walked away, the image of her sitting in the sunlight stayed with me, the curve of her lips as she smiled softly, the quiet attentiveness in her eyes, the faint warmth of her shoulder brushing mine. That evening, I realized that the emotional struggle wasn't about her or me. It was about navigating something that felt both forbidden and natural, a connection that demanded patience, courage, and honesty. And even as doubt lingered, I couldn't deny the growing certainty that my heart was irrevocably entwined in the gentle, slow pull of her presence. The quiet rhythm of our interactions was both comforting and tormenting. By now, every glance, every accidental touch, carried a weight that neither of us addressed but both felt. One evening, I found her on the balcony, wrapped in a light shawl against the cool autumn breeze. The city lights sparkled below, but all I could focus on was her, the way the glow of the street lamps kissed her cheek, the soft sway of her hair as it caught the wind, the gentle curve of her shoulders under the shawl. I lingered near the doorway, pretending to admire the view but acutely aware of the distance between us, both physical and unspoken. She turned slightly and caught my gaze. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed suspended. There was a tension there, delicate and precise, like the pull of a string ready to snap or tighten depending on who made the first move. Her lips curved in a small, knowing smile, one that wasn't playful or teasing but quietly charged, carrying the promise of unspoken understanding. I shifted slightly, aware of the faint warmth radiating from her, the subtle scent of her perfume mingling with the night air. The sensation made my chest tighten, my pulse racing, and yet my mind insisted on caution, on restraint. We fell into a comfortable silence, one that spoke louder than words ever could. Her gaze occasionally flicked to my hands, which rested nervously on the railing. I noticed how her fingers flexed, almost brushing the edge of the railing, and my imagination flared at the thought of them brushing mine. But I held back. There was a fragility in the moment, a quiet respect for the invisible boundaries we hadn't dared to cross. We began talking, softly, about ordinary things, the fading leaves, the distant hum of traffic, a stray cat that had found its way onto the balcony below. Yet even in this mundane conversation, the tension hummed beneath every word, every pause. Our proximity, the quiet interplay of glances, the almost touch of our hands as we moved closer to adjust our positions, made every small gesture feel amplified, intimate, electrifying. At one point, she leaned slightly closer, her shoulder brushing mine as she laughed at something small I had said. The warmth of her presence pressed softly against me, and for a second, all hesitation seemed to melt. I wanted to speak, to say something honest and raw, but the words caught in my throat, trapped by the fear of breaking the delicate balance between us. Instead, I simply leaned in slightly, closing the tiniest bit of space, and felt her warmth settle around me like a quiet invitation. When the evening ended, and I walked back to my apartment, the memory of that shared silence and subtle connection lingered. Every flicker of her smile, every faint brush of her hand, had left its mark, an invisible thread pulling me closer, urging me to face my feelings while keeping the unspoken intact. The tension between us was no longer accidental, it had become a quiet force, a gentle, compelling ache that neither of us could fully name yet neither wanted to resist. The tension that had been quietly threading through our encounters finally demanded acknowledgement. One evening, the autumn air carried a chill as I found her sitting on the small bench near the courtyard, her shawl wrapped snugly around her shoulders. The fading light cast long shadows across the paving stones, and the soft hum of the city felt like a gentle backdrop to what was about to unfold. I approached slowly, heart pounding, aware that this moment could change everything. She looked up as I neared, her eyes meeting mine with that familiar, quiet intensity that had held me captive from the very first smile. For a moment, we simply regarded each other, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full of unspoken words and possibilities. Her gaze softened, and in that instant, I realized that the hesitation I had felt for weeks had been mirrored in her own quiet reserve. I've been meaning to say something, I began, voice slightly unsteady. She tilted her head, encouraging me without speaking, as if granting permission to finally voice the thoughts that had been building inside. I don't want to overstep, but I can't pretend I don't feel something when I'm around you. Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile, warm yet cautious. She reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair from my forehead, her fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary. I'm glad you said that, she murmured softly. I've felt it too. I just wasn't sure how to say it. The relief was immediate and profound, a tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying dissolving in the simple acknowledgement of shared feelings. We spoke quietly, gently unraveling the layers of our emotions, sharing vulnerabilities and fears we had kept to ourselves. She talked about moments of loneliness, of subtle hesitation, and I admitted my own hesitations, my awareness of our differences and the silent question of how others might see us. Her hand found mine, warm and steady, and the gesture carried the weight of reassurance, trust, and mutual understanding. I felt a calm settle over me, a quiet certainty that what we shared was real, delicate yet undeniable. The age difference, the quiet worries about judgment, none of it mattered in that moment. What mattered was the connection, the gentle pull we had nurtured through weeks of shared glances, fleeting touches, and soft conversations. We lingered on the bench as twilight deepened, hands entwined, shoulders brushing, hearts beating with the quiet joy of recognition. Her head tilted slightly toward mine, the warmth of her presence enveloping me. There were no grand declarations or dramatic gestures, just the honest simplicity of acknowledgement, of being seen and accepted by someone whose presence had quietly become essential. As I walked back to my apartment that evening, the memory of her hand in mine, her smile, the gentle brush of her shoulder against mine, remained vivid. There was no rush, no urgency, only the patient understanding that our connection was strong, tender, and real. In finally speaking our feelings aloud, we had crossed the invisible threshold between longing and acceptance, stepping into a quiet intimacy that promised warmth, companionship, and the slow, beautiful unfolding of something lasting. The days after our confession were quiet but alive with a new, comforting rhythm. There was no rush to redefine everything between us. Instead, the small gestures and shared moments became a gentle affirmation of what we had discovered. Each glance, each brush of hands, carried the weight of mutual understanding, soft and deliberate, weaving us closer together without words. One morning, I found her in the courtyard, tending to the tiny garden she had nurtured for months. She looked up as I approached, her hair catching the sunlight in golden strands, and smiled that smile, the one that had captivated me from the start. "Morning," she said softly, her voice warm and familiar. I smiled back, and for the first time, the smile felt fully ours, unhurried, free from hesitation. We spent the morning together, sharing the quiet work of watering plants and arranging small pots. Our hands brushed repeatedly, sometimes accidentally, sometimes intentionally, each touch lingering just a fraction longer than necessary. It was a comfort, a subtle thrill, and a gentle acknowledgement of the bond that had grown between us. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume blending with the earthy aroma of the soil, and it felt like the world itself had conspired to create this perfect, ordinary intimacy. Later, we shared coffee in the small lobby of the building. Sitting close on the worn sofa, our shoulders touched lightly, and I felt the steady warmth of her presence. She laughed at a joke I made, and I caught the softness in her eyes, the unspoken joy that mirrored my own. Our conversations flowed easily now, touching on dreams, memories, and quiet reflections on life, each word deepening the trust and comfort between us. Evenings became our quiet sanctuary. We would sit together on her balcony, the city lights flickering below, shoulders brushing, hands occasionally meeting and holding. There was no urgency, no pressure, just a patient unfolding of companionship, trust, and a subtle, enduring affection. When she rested her head lightly on my shoulder, it felt like coming home, a quiet confirmation that we belonged in each other's presence. There were still moments of playful teasing, small, gentle touches, lingering glances that spoke volumes, and shared silences that felt full and complete. Each day brought another layer of comfort, a deepening of intimacy that was both tender and exhilarating. We didn't need words to define what had grown between us. It was visible in the quiet rituals of our mornings, in the warmth of shared coffee, in the simple brush of hands, and in the subtle electricity of a lingering smile. As I returned to my apartment that night, I realized how ordinary life had become extraordinary. The connection that began with a single, lingering smile had grown into something quietly monumental, a bond built on patience, trust, and the slow, steady unfolding of hearts learning to recognize one another. In the end, it wasn't grand gestures or dramatic declarations that defined our story, but the gentle, persistent presence of affection, understanding, and shared moments that transformed the everyday into something profoundly beautiful.